Welcome to Season 3.
Hi, there she is.
How are you?
Doing really great. You look so good.
Thanks.
So hello, everybody, and welcome to Change for the Better, the Power of Arts in Education, episode 40.
I'm Stacy Tiro, a high school performing arts teacher for over 25 years. I've taught a lot of amazing people. Now that so many of my students are adults, they'll teach me how, through the lessons in my classroom, they have been changed for the better.
Yay! This is the end of season 3. You are the closer for season 3.
How exciting.
It's very exciting. I love it. Today, I'm talking to another Spring Valley graduate from 2009. She's for the same class as my episode 5 guest, Stephanie Lorden Diazio. I remember this beautiful woman as a bright, sassy, vivacious teenager. She knew who she was, she knew what she wanted, and she was not afraid to express herself to the world. I enjoyed teaching her in my multicultural and ballet dance classes. And I really tried. I tried hard to get her to gravitate to thespians, but to no avail. I was unsuccessful. So she chose to admire the theater activities from afar. She did dance in the dance concert, so she got her performance experience there. And instead, she chose to focus on her in-class dance experience and, more importantly, her future as an educator. Now, after graduation, she received a Bachelor's of Science with certifications in early childhood and childhood education from Iona College, then moved on to her Master's of Science in literacy education from Hunter College. And then, of course, on top of that, she also has certificates in educational leadership, school building, and school district leadership. Like I said, she is a woman who knows what she wants and she makes it happen. Now, at her core, her greatest interest is in improving the educational process for children. She is a literacy specialist, and her first job out of college was for the New York City Department of Education, where she quickly became a model ELA teacher in the Learning Partners program, which was in New York, a school reform program that promoted interschool collaboration to maximize student achievement. In the 6 years that she was there, the students' reading and writing levels went from 10% on grade level to almost 60% on grade level. It was quite an accomplishment. She was a major force in that process of change. In 2019, knowing that she needed a change, she took a position closer to home in the North Rockland School District, teaching literacy at the elementary level, and has joined many school and district committees to help develop new partnerships and support initiatives. Today, she is an ELA instructional coach at the Haverstraw Elementary School. Now, earlier this week, just a couple days ago, at the time of this recording, I had the pleasure of seeing her in person at Spring Valley High School's annual alumni night. And when I saw her, my eyes lit up. I was so taken by the woman that she has become. Perhaps a little more demure, but just as thoughtful as I remember her teenage self. And there we had the opportunity to speak at length about her career in education so far, for which she has built quite the resume in a relatively short amount of time, and for which she takes the utmost pride. She is and always has been on an upwards trajectory to do her part for the children she serves. So it is my pleasure to turn the mic over to my guest, and she will answer our first question, which is, What is your name, the year that you graduated, and tell me a little more about what you do right now.
Well, Miss Tira, I'm so moved by what you said. I'm a little emotional. Thank you so much for having me. And look, this is complete vulnerability, and I think that that goes to who I am. So I'm happy to be here. My name is Karema Brown. I graduated from Spring Valley High School, as you know, in 2009. Currently a literacy instructional coach in the North Rockland Central School District at Haverstraw Elementary School. In this role that I partake in currently, I serve staff and students. That goes along with my core of being of service to people. Um, so, with that being said, look at me, I'm still emotional. You know, I'm a crybaby. I'm sorry, podcast. I am a sap. And I think that I don't, may I? I'm a bit emotional because I believe that words have immense power over who and what you become. Hearing you describe me as my young self reminded me my why. I never cried on a podcast, so this is the first time for everything. But guess what? I don't mind because there's power in vulnerability. And hopefully, it is a healing experience for everyone. I don't mind showing up as my true self, as you mentioned, just being me. But I think that this is a side of me that many don't see. In essence of tears, because I hold it together.
How we present ourselves to the world is often just a piece of who we are. It is not our everything. This podcasting experience, it's been such a gift. I don't know what parts of the universe decided to converge to like get me to this place. But the things that people share and of themselves, not just the stories, but when they decide to open up and knowing that this is going to be seen by however many people,
Mhm.
strangers in the world, to really tell their honest truths about not just who they are, but who they were. My whole goal for the podcast is to offer up to anybody, but young people especially, high school students, young 20s who are in that sort of transitional place in their lives, to offer them the knowledge through real life people that the place where they are now is not going to be where they stay,
Mhm.
and that who they are at their core is going to carry them throughout the rest of their lives. And so if they embrace who they are at their core, they're going to be okay.
I couldn't have said it any better. And you know what? I think why I'm moved is because, as you described, I was young, I was bold, I was not afraid to use my voice.
Mm-mm.
And I didn't show, I don't want to say weakness, but I showed that I had courage to do something that some may not, because I valued words, as I just said. But I think with all of that, with having that courage, the vulnerability of not feeling like I had it together or certain or being moved by other people is not something that I showed the world. I think that's why.
I think we're going to get more into that. And maybe even with this next question, using your adult brain, describe your adolescent self.
I feel as though my adolescent self was still very much functioning as my 5-year-old self, wanting to be seen, wanted to be loved, wanting to keep the peace. And by doing so, I became a martyr in ways and masked so that I could ensure that people around me were okay. Whether it were my peers, my parents, my grandparents, I tried to hold it together and be that strong person for everyone. But in doing so, at times it caused me to feel angry when I was by myself. And I think it's because I wanted so badly to put out in the world what I wanted to receive. And if I didn't get that, particularly with my father or dealing with change of my brother being born at my peak adolescence, I didn't know how to process. So I told myself that I'm going to use my voice to speak up, but I also morphed or developed. I needed to be morph in order to receive what I wanted.
I think that is the adolescent creed. Wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, needing to be loved, like all of those things that you said. Teenagers are their 5-year-old selves and adults are their teenage selves with a little more experience. I love the description that you gave of yourself, because as a teacher who knew you, who loved you, you could sort of see that, because at the time you were very bold and not, I wouldn't like go into like that obnoxious realm like that. I wouldn't characterize it as that. It was never that, but it was almost sometimes there was sometimes like an indignant way. This is how I think, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. This is how I think, and I know that I'm right. That's sometimes tough for adolescents and for the people around them to embrace. Sometimes teenagers sort of push the envelope a little bit too far. They don't know how to sort of regulate how they feel with, what's appropriate on the outside. But I always appreciated your strength of character, that knowing of who you were and what was right, and standing up for what was right, and pursuing the things that not just were your passions, but that the things that you were driven to pursue. So if you think back to your time in the studio, the dance classes, the performance, specifically in that context, what was something that happened in the studio that helped you to manage or to regulate your adolescent self?
Having fun and giving myself permission to do so and let loose. Because I did have a strong personality, I do, but it wasn't about my grades in core content areas. It wasn't about my artistic abilities in the sense of drawing and painting, because that's something that I was skilled in. I do have a big personality, and it allowed me to tap in to skills that I had that I kind of shied away from. As you mentioned, you tried to get me into thespians. I could put on voices, I could be silly and do all of these things, but I was like, I'm not too sure, I'm not too sure about that. But I think you speaking to me reminded me that it's okay that I don't have to fit in one box specifically. I embody multiple skills where I don't have to box myself in. I can be strong in academics, I can be an artist, but part of that artistry is the child that survives and gives themselves permission to just simply be in the moment and have fun in community. And I think that's what I valued, is that when I was in your dance studio, there was community. I remember specifically at the time this is just one moment. We had, I don't know if it was a BOCES class with kids with multiple disabilities, that would come into the room and dance with us. And so often, people that are different are often marginalized or ostracized or looked down on. And as you said, I always tried to do what was right, like that justice, like of speaking up for those that can't speak for themselves. Like I've always had this like innate drive to be that person to advocate for others, and build that community. And I think I got that sense in your room, because they would come in, and I remember one girl specifically, she couldn't speak, she was mute, but in your dance class she was able to move, and no one looked at her as other. We understood that we were different, but it was okay. Those are principles or life skills that you can't teach someone. They have to experience it to broaden their perspective about life and people.
Normalizing the thing that sometimes we're afraid to normalize. That sense of othering is really strong in the adolescent population. I mean, honestly, it's really strong in the greater community as well. Let's be honest there. I've always taken pride in the fact that whoever walks into the studio belongs there. Maybe they don't think they belong at first, but at some point, I hope they do get that feeling like, yeah, I belong here just as much as anybody else. So,
In that space, you took it upon yourself to get to know me beyond the dance studio. So if I were going through something at home, you and I would have a brief second to discuss what I was feeling, because I did try to mask certain things as an adolescent, because I was concerned of what my mom would think, what my dad would think. Would that cause conflict? How would that impact relationships that I have in that space of just being in school? And you would give me little tidbits that gave me permission to acknowledge my feelings. And I don't think that I received that. Not that I didn't have the space at home, but my mom was very strong. So no matter what was going on, and I was sheltered from things, but as you get older, you see your perspective changes. So my mom was always strong, stoic, push through no matter what. So I kind of inherited feeling that I needed to have it all together too. I didn't have time to process my feelings. Not that she didn't give me permission to, but I just trying to be her in a sense. I tried to handle my feelings by myself, but being in your studio gave me space to know that I didn't have to do it by myself, that in school, that's a place where you negotiate who you are as a person, but it has to be a safe space, and there has to be an adult or multiple adults that offer that space for you to feel comfortable doing so. So I think that's something that I got from your room.
yay. Yay. Well, now that you are creating your own spaces for children, taking the lessons that you learned, what have you been able to pull from your past lessons? And what do you use today, maybe as an educator, for your students?
I think that my upbringing and things that I've experienced has caused me to be hypervigilant, where I notice and pick up on the people around me. I'm able to tend to their needs. And in education, we know that that is all that you do is tend to the needs of others. But at the same time, when I was 23, maybe, I said to myself, I understand that a higher source or God, whomever anyone believes in, has given me this position and my presence has power. But if I want to be more for children, I have to embody that and I need to do the work myself. So if I want to teach children how to have healthy boundaries, I have to practice having healthy boundaries myself. If I want to teach children how to move through a world that may not have necessarily been, or a system that was not necessarily built for them, then I have to model how to do so. If I want to show children how much value there is in diversity and inclusivity, which is something that I think I just got because of East Ramapo at the time was all colors and creed, I have to show them real life examples of that and build a community. I think something that has served me is being able to invest in my kids beyond the classroom. And as I've gotten in your studio, get to know them, become a student of my students and the people that I serve as I continue growing, because it's not just students at this point. I keep remembering that we want to feel loved, we want to feel cared for, we want to feel heard. So I make it my business, for lack of a better word, to show children that I'm listening to them, that their words matter. It's okay to feel how you're feeling. But if we don't have that emotional security, then academically we can't reach them. And that's just with people. If I'm in a space of survival I'm unable to process anything else. So I really try to create that space of community, that when you enter the space, you are loved, you're cared for, but teach life skills of using your voice and not being afraid, to have the audacity to believe that you can change the world despite what someone might tell you. Because we live in a world where we are constantly told how to be, how to act, and what box we can be put in.
Mhm.
So, with that, I value talking to children just as you spoke to me. My mom spoke to me, because building those relationships truly change or impact someone's life more than you know. I mean, I'm thinking of, I've transitioned from the school that I was in last year. I check on my kids from the Bronx, from my old school, although all of these years have passed. Why? Because it was done to me. Case in point. And I had one little girl that she had social emotional issues, but she made such growth last year where I was so proud of her. I know that she's having a hard time this year, but I'm no longer in that school. And it hurts me to hear that. And I think of her often, but I still check in. And I asked her, well, what's going on? And I might be going off, but I said, it's concerning to me. It's okay for you to feel how you're feeling, but what has changed? What's caused you to regress some? Last year, in 10 months, you made more growth than we could have thought of. And I felt it in my gut because I'm pretty intuitive. I knew that she was going to say me, but I didn't want to believe it, right? Because I think that goes along with giving yourself permission to take up space,
Yeah.
honoring yourself, like almost imposter syndrome. So, I knew I had a feeling she would say me, but I didn't want to believe that.
Mm.
And she said, well, you're not here. And like my heart was like, ah.
Yeah.
So I think like what I want is all kids to feel like they have that person. There's always someone in a building that they can go to because it's who they develop. Not talk to me or given me that permission, where would I have ended up? If Miss Vogel hadn't spoke to me and noticed that I had a natural knack for children, where would I be?
It's very powerful feedback. I don't know, maybe in some way, it's another reason for me doing this podcast, that imposter syndrome, and that is a theme that runs well throughout this podcast. The imposter syndrome is real. It almost doesn't matter how much good feedback you get from the people that you've worked with or the people around you. There's something in our brains that stops us from believing it at some point. And the feedback is important because when you know that you do good work, you recognize that you do good work, the imposter syndrome gets in the way of that sometimes. And it makes you question, what right do I have to be here? Maybe somebody else, could do it better. The thing that we have to keep in the back of our brains is, yeah, but nobody does it like you. Nobody does it in the way that you do it. And the people that you're working with need you to be there. They have tons of teachers, and those teachers bring themselves. There's only one you. You can believe in that. And, that's what you need to get over that imposter syndrome hump.
And I know for myself where mine stems from, because I think I've always been self aware of what I can do and who I am. But despite that, I always had this little feeling of not being enough. And it stems from, my 5-year-old self. I can be the best in all that I am. And I'm hoping that someone will see me, particularly my dad. As an adult, my adult self, I analyze myself quite often and question how that's impact the way I show up in the world, as you mentioned earlier. Because I think so often we want to be chosen. We're waiting for someone to see us, but it may cause us to feel like we can do all of these things to prove a point. And I think that's where I've shifted, that I don't have to prove that I can do X, Y, Z. I can simply just do it because that's who I am.
Yes.
And someone else's position doesn't define who I am.
That's correct. You can live in that, and you can live with that. You over the years, you've spoken a lot about your dad and your relationship with your dad and how important he is to you, both your mom and your dad. But I feel like you take a special sort of pride in your dad that came through very clearly through the years.
I think that my thinking and my moral compass, a lot of it comes from my mom. I feel as though emotionally, as a person for most of my life, I lived through my dad. But what I admired about him is his service, but it was a hard pill to swallow. Who he showed up to be for other people, he could never be for me. But I'm okay with that because of me being proud is seeing that life is bigger than me. There's a purpose to all that we experience, and I am proud of the work that he's done. Growing up in Spring Valley and him being an officer, it came with, I don't want to say it wasn't a burden, it came with like a responsibility. But I feel as though part of it was feeling like I needed to mask or present to the world that everything was okay because of the line of work that he did, and me feeling proud of him and what he does for the public. But public and private personas are different, and that's okay. But I didn't want anyone to ever think bad of him because I cared for him. And I think that that manifested as a child or as an adolescent because I felt like I needed to mask for other people all the time.
That kind of ties together for me a couple of things. In May of 2020, George Floyd is murdered. I created that play. And I was looking for feedback, artwork for that effort. Karema, being the extremely talented visual artist that she is, she's a painter. I don't think I knew that when she was in high school. I think that came out later as something that was a very strong talent. And maybe what I'll do is in the blog is if you can give me some images of your artwork, I can put that in there, maybe even here in the podcast.
Well, I did this behind me.
So she had gone to a protest in 2020, right shortly after his murder, like when everything was sort of like exploding and the pandemic was going on. And she brought with her a piece of her artwork. Do you want to like talk a little bit about that piece?
Sure. I was extremely moved by all of the things that have taken place in the world. And I felt that theme of I don't fit one box. I'm Black. I identify as a Black woman, but also my dad's side is very multi-race.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, being Irish, Native, right? So my looks might be one thing, but my background is another. And with that, my dad being an officer, he identifies as a Black man, but he wears that badge with so much honor and pride, and he would be the first person to put his life on the line for a community that he served. So with that, and what took place with George Floyd, I felt that these two worlds, they were meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And where do I fit, and how does that impact where I am? So I painted a picture that said Black Lives Matter, and the background was red because I just kept thinking that over years, as my perspective of the world has grown, there's been a lot of bloodshed due to police brutality. But I didn't have that perspective growing up because of my dad. Police officers are community workers. They are valued. They are great. You call them if you need them. I had such great perspective. So in that, there's a gun that is being shot, like you see the inside of the barrel. But inside of the barrel, I painted the thin blue line because I see where two worlds meet. If an officer is in fear of his life, I could understand that. I also understand it being a Black woman. So when I painted that image, my rationale was to represent both sides that I align with, because I think that the work that an officer does is heroic. I'm proud of work that my dad has done in the community, whether it was delivering babies or keeping us safe. I was proud of, I am still very much so. but I understood that we have these polarized views and society has kind of like pinned black versus blue together. When in fact,
They operate in tandem. They don't operate separately.
yes. And when my dad takes off his uniform, he is a black man, right? But
Yeah.
he is a police officer through and through to his core.
Yeah.
You know, when he retired, we like joked because his Bitmoji still had his uniform on, and we're like, dude, you can take the the uniform off at this point. But
You're a
I
civilian.
but I think that painting also reminded me of something that had taken place in the classroom. And as I mentioned, you want to be more for kids and become a student of them. And I recognized years ago that a child or someone else's lived experience doesn't impact me, but it builds empathy. It doesn't directly impact, like it doesn't take away from who I am. So when Mike Brown had gotten killed some years ago, 2015 maybe, hands up, don't shoot,
Yep.
in the South Bronx, and my kids were like distraught. So I wanted to create that space for them to process their feelings as I received, right? And I listened. Every single child in that classroom at 10 years old had a negative encounter with a police officer. Whether it was they were walking down the street and they were just stopped with someone in their family, whether they saw things in the community in which they lived, because it was very different than, where I grew up. But I said to myself, wow, then how does that impact the relationship or the perspective of police officers in the world? And I understood that I didn't experience that. So what I tried to do then is use my dad and his experiences and bring that in. Can you come for career day? Can you come and speak to the kids? Can we walk down to the 40 precinct down the street and see if they'll come in and do things as well? Because an officer's job is to serve and protect. When you serve a community, you wear many different hats. And I think that when I painted that picture, I think it showed exactly the two worlds colliding. Because I thought about my kids and things that they've experienced. I thought about things that I watched. I thought about my dad being first in line. That's kind of where I was at with it.
I can imagine being on your end of it, the daughter of an officer who is also identifies as Black, how not just how scary it is, because I feel like being the family member of an officer is just scary all the time in general.
Yeah.
But the added layer of your identity complicates things
in multiple ways, even as an educator. And I realized that when you are underrepresented in a space, you lack leverage to change it. So if we want police officers and a shift in it, then we have to bring in people from the community and connect with them. And they need to see representations of themselves in the police force. My dad going in as a Black man in an inner city school and sharing his life story and just simply connecting with the kids because of who he is, they can maybe see parts of themselves. Mm-hmm. Being a Black educator, when statistics show that the demographics of the teaching population is very different than the demographics of the students, it changes things too. But I think the beauty of all of that, and this is something that I've learned being in Spring Valley High School, in East Ramapo Central School District, in your studio, is that diversity is such a beautiful thing, and infiltrating different spaces allow us to coexist.
And to understand things that are outside of our experience.
Yes.
I think that's the most valuable thing that I've gotten from being in that space for as many years as I have. Because I grew up, and we talked about this the other day, I grew up in North New City, and that was the whitest of white communities. Mm-hmm. And I told you that I think of the 4 Black kids in our school at the time, I was friends with 2 of them. And so going from that environment to teaching and being a leader in an environment at Spring Valley that largely didn't look like me, I had to learn really quickly the perspectives of other people.
Yes.
And it didn't happen overnight. It happened over the course of many years. And I'm still learning after 26, 20, however many years I've been doing this. I'm still learning that. And I embrace that now. I look to my students. I'm like, what else can I learn? What else, like, what, tell me something, because there's so much that I don't know. I mean, it makes you a better teacher, obviously, but it makes you a better person.
Yes.
How
And
you like interact with the world.
yes, and when growing up in East Ramapo, like I didn't realize that we were essentially in a cultural bubble. I had friends of all colors and creeds. My teachers predominantly in East Ramapo were white, and that's okay. But I never felt like other. I think multiculturalism was huge within the district where we celebrated everyone's differences. I mean, think about Spring Valley High School. We used to have multicultural month and we tried different foods from Russia, Ukraine, Haiti, Dominican Republic. Like it was just immersed in how we functioned as a
And
living organization.
we still do.
So I didn't realize that that was such a big thing until I started infiltrating new spaces to learn from people that didn't grow up like me. So when I went to Iona College, it's a predominantly white institution, right? I had a roommate. I was her first Black friend in 2009. And I said, how can you show me? And I'm not asking to judge, I'm asking to learn. What is it like where you grew up? Because I wanted to understand. But then that broadened my perspective of systemic things that were established beyond me that I just didn't know of. But then it kind of ignited that fire that I already had of duty or feeling responsible to prove otherwise, that Black women can do great, or Black people, or people that are just marginalized in general can do anything equal to white counterparts. And I hate to make it sound like race is put together, but race is a social construct that it's infiltrated every part of life that we have. And it helped define who I am as an educator, because I might teach kids that look like me, that might not look like me, and that's okay. And then moving into the South Bronx as a teacher, I looked like those kids, but culturally we came from two different worlds. So now how do we connect? So it's beyond race. It's just seeing people for who and what they are. And I think that is one of the most valuable experiences that I had with being in your room, is because that's what it was about. When the students with disabilities came into the classroom, they weren't looked at like,
Mhm.
I'm seeing what you come in with and how can I leverage that and support you in that moment. And if you did it right, okay. And well, who says right? But if you did something and you tried, that's all that matters. Humility. Like you have to just be in it to get that.
Right. That's an experiential thing. How have you changed since you left high school?
I've given myself permission to process how I feel,
Mhm.
that I don't have to have it all together at all times, that I can fall apart, but I'm going to pick myself up. I can think a certain way, but I'm not attached to outcome because I am a lifelong learner. So as a kid or high school, I thought one way, but I was still in many ways open to learning from others because that was the culture of where I came from, but I was very firm in what I thought. As I've grown, I'm not attached to outcome like I used to be, because who and what's for me won't pass me by. I'm being present in the moment. It's not just one thing. It's not white or black. And I think that's kind of how I thought. Like it's one way or another, where life is messy and there's a bunch of gray area, and that's okay.
That is life. Like
Yep.
we actually we live in the gray. And I believe that especially in the young people, the adolescent set, because their brains they just, can't adequately process the confusion of life, they have to think in black or white terms. When you get older, your brain chemistry develops more and sets into its adult self, then we can start, processing those gray areas. But then I think they fall back on the black and white because that's really the only thing they can emotionally handle. It's this or it's that.
Also, I've changed by questioning who I am, why I think the way I think, what was subconsciously taught to me, how did that impact the way I've shown up in the world, and really looking at myself and being intentional and forming new habits. And I'm still working on feeling as though it's okay for me to take up space.
That doesn't stop.
And I think that when I was younger, it was like, I can do X, Y, Z. Like you mentioned, I have my bachelor's in this, I have my master's in this, I have certificate in advanced leadership, and I would do all of these things. And then I would reach these goals that I set for myself, but then I would say, but I'm still not happy. So I recognized as an adult that attaining a goal doesn't define my happiness or joy. I could have it all and or live in a castle and still be miserable. I think part of how I've changed is doing inner work and not validating myself based off of what I did or what I can do.
Taking all of the stuff that you learned in your adult life, what would your adult self tell your high school self now to help ease the way?
My adult self tell my high school self,
Mm.
remember your why, stand firm in your values, but also know that you don't have to perform or mask in order to receive accolades or be loved. You are worthy of that simply because you are you.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wish I had those words for you back
Well, you did permission to understand that, but I don't think I was in a space to process it because of just life that I experienced. I was fortunate enough to have outstanding teachers in East Ramapo Central School District like you from the time I started in fourth grade throughout 12th that gave me tidbits or little gems that helped me come to this realization as an adult. It's helped me in my profession more than anything. I had women, I didn't have many male teachers, as we know, we were mostly women in the profession, but I had women that were strong, that could do all of the things, but they showed investment. And like, I feel like the greatest investment that we can make is in the investment of others that transcends time. Because there's going to be a time when I'm not here, but what I've done will remain. So I think from my younger self is knowing that it's okay for me to just simply be and lean on others for support. There's like an African proverb I read like years ago, and it said, a child that doesn't feel loved will burn down the community to feel its warmth. I was like, oh, but had I not had teachers to cultivate that community and make me feel loved when there was probably times that I didn't feel it, I just felt it. Like I internalized things, and that might not necessarily been the intention. It was just me. I had teachers that allowed me to not burn down the village. And as an adult, I want to cultivate that village where all feel that way. But I think if I could tell my younger self is listen, because I'm a talker. And I've learned that I have to be more intentional with listening.
What is something that you're grappling with now?
I'm still working on feeling like I am enough and that it's okay for me to take up space. Because I think as I've experienced certain things in life, even as young as 5, as I mentioned, there was always this feeling of not being enough. And I know that I have gifts that I can give to the world, and they are enough. I don't have to perform in order to simply be. But I think something that I'm also grappling with is we live in a very political state now, and I fear using my voice and saying the right thing that needs to be said because it will have a greater impact on the world to be a better place. But I fear how that would impact me in my career.
How it might be received by others.
That's really hard for me.
Yeah. Well, and Unfortunately, we can't control how others perceive us. And I think that not just your intentions, but your track record of who you are speaks for itself. The hope is that the people who will help you to achieve what you want to help do better for the world, your community, the schools where you're in, see that and know that and are working with you to help you achieve that.
I couldn't agree more. When I first started teaching, my literacy coach was my mentor.
Mhm.
He would tell me every day, make your name sound like something. And I'd look at her and just, okay. Because my mom was really big on that. When I put my name down on a piece of paper, that was a representation of who I am.
Mhm.
So I kind of already had that instilled, but she would say to me, when people hear your name, they know who you are and what you do. So as I've moved from where I started, I think that still holds true. Like I read a story in my classroom called Ghost Boys, and I was afraid of the feedback I would get, or because it's a touchy text. But I was myself with my kids, and it seemed to who I am and what I do, and I didn't have any feedback, and which is okay for that. But I think that goes to when someone knows your intentions and knows your core and your heart, they know it's coming from a pure place and not a place of divisiveness.
Yeah. And that's who you are. And like I said, you can't always control how people are going to receive things. There's always going to be someone out there who, for whatever reason, does not embrace either who you are, but that does not change who you are.
Yeah.
Tell me one thing that you miss about your high school self, and then tell me one thing that has gotten better since you became an adult.
I miss having an adult village. I miss that now as an adult because so often we associate children needing villages, but adults need it too. So I do miss that because I valued the wisdom that adults had around me. And sometimes as an adult, you have to try harder to have that. And something that has gotten better, I think, just me understanding who I am as a person and being intentional about what I do, who I'm around, and intentional about doing the inner work and not like disassociating or going shopping just to distract myself from a feeling, an uncomfortable feeling. And I think that comes with worrying about conflict and making sure things are okay. And I think now, while I'm still working on conflict, I think it's better that I've acknowledged that not all conflict is bad conflict.
Yeah.
There's good conflict and there's growth after that. So I think that I've gotten better with understanding that and trying to acknowledge that it's okay. And I think sometimes I tried to mask to keep peace, or I was nice because I was concerned about someone else. But I can be direct, and it's not nice. There's no way to just define it. I'm just being direct. And what you said, someone else's perception or how they perceive things, that's their responsibility. I've grown with understanding that I don't have the responsibility to fix others. I can do my part and show up, but at the end of the day, it falls on that person.
Mhm.
And that's what I've gotten.
If you could give a piece of sage advice to high school students now, what would that be?
Be mindful of who you surround yourself with. Energy contagion is real, and the people that you surround yourself with truly impact the trajectory of your life. When I saw you the other day at the high school, they had our yearbook. I don't even know where my yearbook is, probably in the box in the garage or something.
Mhm.
But I came across a picture of myself from Miss Vogel's child psychology class. And I was maybe 16 there. I was 16 here in the picture, just about. You see?
Mhm.
If I hadn't had someone to really see something in me and polish it some, then where would I be? So I think it's important to be mindful and seek good people and have a strong moral compass that you don't have to deviate from who you are and your belief to be accepted. If you feel like something's not right, it's probably not right. Trust your gut. And those people are just not for you. and that's okay. But good people exist, and there are people that want to see you do well. So seek those people out. Also know that external things don't define you. Know who you are. Figure out what you value, what matters to you. Be strong. Be strong. And being strong, not in the sense of how many times you can get hit by something. If we think about a palm tree, it's super strong, hurricanes and so forth. It moves and it sways. So be willing to weather storms, but move as it passes.
Don't be rigid,
Yeah.
because then you break.
Yep.
This brings us back to today, right now, as your adult self. Tell me 3 self-care practices that you do now that help you to center or regulate yourself.
I take deep breaths quite often. I do, because I realize that taking deep breaths help me regulate. I was in a social emotional training yesterday, and we're talking about when you see someone else's storm, match your storm, co-regulate. And I wondered, where did I learn? Like, if I tell a student take a deep breath, that's their issue. But if I say, okay, let's take a deep breath, and I do it with them, how that's changed. So I think that taking deep breaths is really important. Seeking out spaces where I feel comfortable weathering a storm with someone, whether it be like that one trusted person. And I journal and read simultaneously at times. I read a lot of books. It's got some back there, like there's one, The Audacity to Be Queen. I think I picked that one up because I think reading helps me expand my knowledge, and then it causes me to reflect, so I start journaling. So I take deep breaths. I seek out those that I'm comfortable or safe spaces for me to talk to, so I can have someone to co-regulate, my mom being one of them, bless her heart. She's great. And then I also read and journal at the same time.
I actually, when you said deep breath, because again, that's something that comes up all the time, which I'm so happy to hear, because it is the simplest thing to do. Well, right now we're in the middle of our African dance unit, right? And that's like the one that all the kids, they just love it. They love the African dance unit. And so we start in the circle. And before we do anything, I say, put your hand on your heart and your belly. And we take like 3 deep breaths. And whether they're in a low state or in a, crazy state, it just kind of brings
Mhm.
us right into the middle of the circle. And then we just start going. It helps me to center myself so that I can lead the class. Because sometimes, there's so much going on. There's so much that we're thinking of in that space when you're teaching, and especially, for me, teaching that content. There's so much content, and it just kind of has to keep rolling and keep going. I can't be in that heightened state of anxiety. I have to be level and calm so it can just roll.
My mom also like gives me tidbits of like mudras when it comes to learning. That she'll tell me like little hand things to do to keep myself calm
Mhm.
in the moment. And I think, I mean, I'm naming a couple, but I think also just allowing myself to feel that I can go someplace, cry for a second, and pull myself together, and it's okay for me to do that. As a kid, I didn't cry because I thought crying was a sign of weakness, and I allow myself to cry now as I started the podcast. But
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 I
before
love that.
I feel like I had to like, no, I can't cry. I have to hold it together. And if I'm feeling any sort of emotion, crying of happiness or sadness, I just allow myself to do that and then move forward. And I think that that's really been helpful because it's a release, it's like an energetic release. And I was just thinking one last thing of all that I've done in such a short time, as you've mentioned. What I'm most proud of is how I showed or presented myself within these last 2 years. It was the most challenging time of my life. And when people see you, as you had mentioned, they show up for you. And my students last year, I showed them all of those things that I said I would want my younger self to see. It's okay for me to cry, but I keep going. It's okay for me to say, oh, I'm frustrated. Or, oh, this is hard, but how do I still move forward despite that or despite challenges? And I think that I really embodied that for the kids that I feel so fortunate enough to have been in their presence last year. I think I truly did that. That you can be all of the things and have storms inside, but you keep going. And what you put out into the world, you receive. Because when my dog passed, or she was sick the last year and a half, I did not know how I would wake up some days because I had all different things going on. I was in school. My mom had COVID. My grandpa had COVID. I had all sorts of things on top of her being sick, like really sick. And there were days where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to wake up. I don't know how I'm going to get out of my bed. But I did for my kids. And I think that goes to who I am. But then when I was at my lowest and she had passed, I walked into my classroom and they held up a sign that said, some angels choose fur instead of wings. And I sobbed. And on my desk, there were all little things that I liked: flowers, a strawberry lemonade from Deli Central, Reese's, like things that they had to pay attention to, right? And I think that they did that because I did it to them. And inside the card, the words that they spoke to me: I'm here if you need me. Blue is in a better place. Like how I spoke into them, it was given back to me. It kind of comes full circle of all that we were talking about, is having that space and showing up as your authentic self and who you are, or who you present to the world, or it comes back to you. I have degrees, but of all that I'm proud of being that example for those kids, despite the challenges that I faced personally, and then being in a state to receive that love that I poured back to them when I needed it the most.
Put in any better words. That is at the heart who a person who is an educator wants to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to go back because I go through a pretty extensive editing process and the blog piece of it. It'll be several weeks before I'm actually taking a strong look at this. But when I do go back to these interviews, I take such joy in remembering, and it's like I'm really seeing it for the first time because we're experiencing it together, but I actually get to see it and absorb it for the first time when I do that first edit pass. There's so much good stuff in here and so many things that are valuable for all of the listeners and the watchers. So I want to thank you so much for sitting with me and chatting with me.
Thank you for including me and thinking of me and being a trusted adult for me, even post secondary. I like you are a person that if I needed to pick up the phone and talk to, that you'd be there. So thank you for the work that you do in your second act because it is needed. You are a light in the world as you are. There is also darkness that consumes you because you're light. But I think you doing things like this has allowed you to, and I don't know personal things, but it's allowed your light to shine in a different way and allow others that may be navigating dark spaces to be light. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, everybody, this closes our third season of Change for the Better, the Power of Arts in Education. Tune in next time for the beginning of season 4. Can't wait to bring this to you. Karema Brown, thank you once again.
You're welcome. tell you that I love your books. I've been saying to my mom forever that one day I will be somewhere, maybe on TV somewhere, but I'm going to be one of those people that sit behind something and there's a sea of books behind me. Because all people that are important are that have something. They have all the books.
Most of these books are not mine. Those are
You are.
most of these are my husband's like comic books and stuff.
That's lovely. No, no one needs to know that.
It's a good background.